Welcome to the second part of week one. We're going to talk about methodology, verification, and tool validation. Validation and verification are things that send forensic examiners screaming into the night and starting to twitch. But they're things that we have to talk about. We have to make sure that we understand the concepts between the two. So let's get started and talk about some of the legal basis for what we do. The work of a computer forensic examiner will ultimately be in a courtroom. Any forensic examiner ultimately end up in a courtroom, whether it be a DNA, fingerprints, any one of these people is going to end up in a courtroom. So the courts had to come up with some standards as far as expert witness testimony goes. And one of those rules was started is the Daubert rule, and it has to deal with Rule 702 and testimony by experts. What does Daubert say? Well, let's look at what Daubert says. Here's all the parts of Daubert, and basically the judge acts as the gatekeeper in these type of hearings. Any side of the court can, defense or prosecution can request a Daubert hearing. This is not done in front of a jury. This is done in front of the judge, and the judge goes through and makes a determinations based upon these principles that you see in front of you here. So what Daubert says is that what you're doing has to be based on sound scientific methodology derived from the scientific method. And then it goes on to talk about his testing and what his scientific methodology and scientific process goes. This is kind of stuff we should have learned in second grade science. But then it adds in the end the degree to which the theory and technique is generally accepted by the relevant scientific community. So Daubert says that you have to have sound scientific methodology and it has to be generally accepted by the relevant scientific community. Both of those have to be true in a Daubert to apply. And for the most part, Daubert rules the roost. Fry is the other standard, or the Fry test. And basically, Fry just says, as long as it's held and reliable as the scientific community. So it takes out the scientific methodology and defining all that. It just says, hey, does computer forensics find that it's relevant? Okay, and it's reliable? Sure, okay. Fry applies where there. Arizona is a Fry state. And these are the kind of, we go to Fry hearings, we go to Daubert hearings sometimes because we end up in federal court also, and federal court uses Daubert. So you may end up in one of these tests, and basically what they're doing in a Daubert or a Fry hearing is testing the scientific basis of what you're doing. And this is why you have to understand the concepts and basics of what we do. Screw up in a Fry test or a Daubert test, and it has wide-ranging ramifications for everybody else who practices that forensic science. It could be in computer forensics, video forensics, mobile forensics. You say something dumb in a Fry or a Daubert hearing, it could have worldwide reaching ramifications. You have to understand that. You can't just say, oh, whatever, it worked for here, it worked there. If you get challenged in a courtroom, if there is a Daubert or a Fry, you could literally stop digital forensics with your actions. You have to understand the weight that these two tests have upon you as the examiner, and you have to understand what that means. That means you have to understand the science behind what you're doing. That's why you're here in this class. That's why we are here today. You've got to keep that in mind. I cannot stress that enough. A mistake here in one of these hearings, and you can kill it all for everybody. Well, Daubert has typically superseded Fry, and they're not really different. Daubert is just like they call it Fry and drag. So, and in the general Rule 702, which is on the previous slide, applies across the board. You have to be able to talk about the science of what you're doing, and you have to be able to talk about the methodology and the testing and what your tools are doing in order to be considered an expert. Now, the process of becoming an expert witness involves voir dire, where you're brought up in front of the judge, he's the gatekeeper, and you go through a series of questions to determine your level of expertise and what you're going to be testifying to. I can't be an expert in women's cosmetics. I know nothing about women's cosmetics. I know my wife buys a lot of them. I know nothing about what they do or what's going on. They make her look nice, she likes them, I'm cool with that. My wife, on the other hand, can't be an expert in computer forensics because she can't even turn on her email. So you understand, you see these extremes, you have to be somewhat knowledgeable in what you're talking about to be considered an expert. And in that voir dire process is where we weed out those who are frauds, sometimes, not all the time, but we try to weed out those that are frauds and those that don't know what they're talking about, and those are just blabbling like I am right now. So let's move on. The scientific methodology. This is stuff that we sort of learned in second grade, but let's review it. The scientific method. What's the problem? Well, then we have to do some research about that, and we come up with a hypothesis. This is what I think is going to happen. We do an experiment to test the hypothesis, and then we make the analysis. We record the results of the comparisons of the experiment, and did that conclusion, did the hypothesis and the experiment did it come out like we said? Then we repeat. Okay, and you can see that the scientific methodology is defined as a method or procedure that has been characterized in natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiments, and formulation, testing, and modifications of hypotheses. Simple stuff. I think we've all pretty much heard that before. If you haven't, there it is. So while the scientific method is cool, but we got to talk about what's called forensic soundness. Well, and that's, people say, well, did you do it in a forensic manner? Was it forensically sound? Well, what does that mean? Well, the term really refers to the processes we use to collect the evidence and process it. It's kind of a loosely held concept. And this is the best that I could find. A forensically sound duplicate is obtained in a manner that does not materially alter the source evidence except to the minimum extent necessary to obtain the evidence. The manner used to obtain the evidence must be documented and should be justifiable to the extent applicable. Well, that doesn't apply just to making a forensic duplicate. That applies to across the board to forensically sound. You don't want to change the evidence unless you absolutely, and to a little tiny bit maybe. Like when you do some cell phones in Cellbrite, it has to upload a client to the cell phone to pull all of the data off. Well, that's just the way it is. There's no other methodology to collect the data. Therefore, it's considered forensically sound. Now, if it went in and interchanged dates and times, all this other good stuff, yeah, we wouldn't do that. But because it is minimally invasive, it is okay at that point. It's considered sound, and it is deemed to be reliable and relevant by the rest of the community and adheres to Daubert and Fry. Okay, but what about all these tools and software we use? Anything that we use to acquire, process, and analyze evidence needs to be verified and validated. We have to be sure that our tools are doing what they're supposed to do. Validation is a confirmation by examination and the provision of objective evidence that a tool, technique, or procedure functions correctly as intended. Verification is a confirmation of a validation with laboratory tools, techniques, and procedures. Important concepts. Validation, the tool, technique, procedure functions correctly as intended, and verification is I tested it and I confirmed what I validated. Get it? It's a hard concept. Read this several times until you get it down. All this is a pain in the butt. So, too much work? Yeah. Hey, listen, when it comes to work smarter, not harder, right? Well, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, hey, the government loves acronyms. There's one for everything. They came up with the Computer Forensics Tool Testing Project. And what it did is it tested all these different tools. And you can go through and test NCase, FTK. This stuff was all tested for us. And it's been documented. Write blockers and disk imaging. All these different, and they're still at it. They're still testing these things. Somebody else did it for us. So we can use their work to say, hey, listen, NCase was validated by NIST. National standards. Perfect. Right. Here's the two links to go to NIST and look through these. And search for some of the tools that you've heard of. Search for NK, search for FTK, autopsy, and these other things. Poke around in these two websites and see what you can find. I mean, get used to using them. You may have to cite some of these in your reports. You may have to cite some of them in future testimonies. So get used to finding things in these two websites. What's in there? Oh my God. Here's a list. I'm not going to read them all to you, but there's a ton in there that they touch on a lot of these different things that we do in forensics. Well, not everything's up there, right? There's never an answer that works for everything. Welcome to digital electronics in a nutshell. There's never one tool that does everything, and there's never one answer that covers everything. So we set up our own, and when you look at their methodologies, it basically boils down to this. We start with a forensically clean drive. We wipe it. It's all zeros. We place known files and information on that drive. I know what's supposed to be there, so I'm making my hypothesis. My tool's going to find this, 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 and this. I set up the test, and I run it. And some of those tools, like the tool shall find a keyword in file slack, and I place a keyword that says cat in file slack, or a keyword in a deleted file like minions in deleted file. And these are the kind of things that we set up in testing. And then we go through the testing, we use our write blockers, we use the tool to find those. Did it find them? Yes. It confirmed the hypotheses that it should find them? Perfect. Do it again? Verified. Run your test. Did it pass? Did it alter the evidence? Go back and look at that known image. The hashes should match, right? Before and after you run the test. If they don't, ruh-roh. What happened? Did it find everything? Were there failures? If it failed, can we still use it? If it failed the process, can we still use it? Well, I'll tell you right now, I've run one phone through Windows NK7, Cellbrite, and MPE Plus, and it all found different stuff. We have to know the limitations into some of the. Sometimes we have to know the problems with our software, and they're not perfect. We find a problem, we call the manufacturer, and say, hey, I got a problem here. Here's a note. Don't use a large drive for doing this. Don't fill up a 3 or 5 terabyte drive. It'll take you days to finish this stuff up. Make it small, quick, and easy. A couple gigabyte hard drive, or a small hard drive like a 40 gigabyte drive, and make it and go from there. And you want to know what? Hey, NIST and those guys, they have images for you to test with. So, okay, we're taking there, but what about the procedures we use? Well, you have to talk about best practices. These are guidelines, not written in stone. It's not like, Moses came down from the mountain. Sorry if you're not of that faith, but I'm just using it as an example. But it's not like if you violate one of these rules, you're going to have lightning strike you. But these guys give guidelines that you can follow to help keep you, hey, I'm working within the guidelines, I'm good. And one of them is SWGD, the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence. This is a group of uber dorks that get together all the time and have very boring meetings that last for 3 days. And they talk about all this crap. And they come up with these best practices. If you've ever sat through one of these meetings, you will never do it twice. But it has to happen. It's a necessary evil. And thank God that these guys do it so that we have something to use as reference. I've developed policy and procedures over the years. I use these as guidance procedures to modify what works wherever I'm working to what falls within that realm. Not everything's covered. Yeah, exactly, right. These are not step-by-step instructions. Click, click, click. This isn't a checklist where you check things off. You have to adapt these things, and you have to adapt to the spirit of the documents. And here's what you understand about the spirit of the documents. It goes back to something like the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. The letter of the law says the speed limit is 45, and thou shalt not drive faster than 45, right? So if you're driving 46, can you be given a ticket? Yeah. Should you be giving a ticket? And no. Okay, the letter of the law says that a cop can give you a ticket. But the spirit of the law says, no, that's not justice. These are guidelines. There's some leeway a few miles an hour over here. Now, if you're doing 85 and a 45, you got to come and you probably should get arrested. So you see, by going like 46, 47, 48, 49, yeah, maybe 50, you're within the spirit of the law. But by doing 80, you're so far outside the spirit and the realm of what that law or what those guidelines were intended for, you're going to have problems. The other thing about these is when you create processes and best guidances for your lab, for your operations, have somebody review them. Have somebody outside go, you know what, that looks pretty cool. There's a lot of places that are willing to do it, and there's a lot of things like the HTCIA, LEVA, SWIFT. They'll review these things for you and peer review them. Accreditation. Lab accreditation. This is something that is really controversial in the digital evidence community. There's lab accreditations out there, ASCLD, the American Society of Crime Lab Directors. But the problem is that a lot of these standards were set up for physical evidence labs like DNA, drug analysis, blood spatter, blah, 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 blah. And These sciences are guided by the laws of nature and physics, whereas technology, things move fast. Remember in week one, part one, we talked about it's more of an art than a science. You have to be flexible. Well, these standards don't have much flexibility to them, and they're also arguments that there's so much documentation that you spend hours filling out forms that talk about the forms that you filled out that you spend hours filling out, and that really slows down innovation and efficiencies. Look, if you can't get the evidence in a courtroom in a timely manner, bad guys get out of jail. Humble opinion, I'll get on my soapbox for a minute. If I have to worry about filling out 10 million forms about what I'm doing and what I did and how I did it and blah, 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 and I miss a timeline to get the digital evidence in the courtroom and a bad guy walks, not acceptable. Here's the bottom line. The National Committee of Forensic Science was brought together to take up some of these challenges in forensic science and try to fix this. It's a government commission. How long is it going to take? Maybe my lifetime, maybe your lifetime, who knows? We don't know. But until the main thing goes, SWIGD is a good operation to look behind and look to for best practices. Here's your assignments this week. You got lab part 2 of week 1. You got to answer one question, respond to 2 of your classmates. And I want a one-page paper on key elements of Fry and Dalbert. Google them. Wikipedia is cool, right? Hey, that's what I did. And I've had experience with Fry and Dalbert. Look it up. Read it. Don't just regurgitate things. Give us some insight on what you think is going on. See you next week.